Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Chris. I'll be the host of your session today, which is on AI, cyber threats, and the importance of ISO 42001 for wholesalers. With the EU AI Act coming into force today, it feels like it's the perfect time to be exploring how businesses can act now to protect themselves, particularly with all the extra kind of security threats that are facing wholesalers and retailers at the moment. So what can they do to protect themselves against AI regulation and compliance challenges, and as compliance challenges accelerate? So we're going to cover a lot of different topics, and throughout the time we want to make sure it's as interactive as possible. So if anybody's got any questions, please send them into the comment section. We'll look at those and redirect them. Obviously, if you've got a specific question for somebody on the panel, please make it clear that you want to go to them. We'll manage those throughout the time. So yeah, send anything you've got. But for now, obviously, I'm not the star, so we want to go through and talk to everybody who's on the panel. So if we can take it one by one, just kind of introduce yourself, that would be wonderful, please. So if we can start with yourself, Katie, please.
Of course. I'm Katie Simmons. I'm a technology and data protection lawyer at international law firm Womble Dickinson. And my focus really is on helping my clients with the advancement of new technologies, including AI. And I help them from kind of a privacy and a tech perspective. And I'm just a massive tech geek, really.
Excellent. Next up then, Lucy.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucy Batley. I own a company called Traction. My background is designing and building bespoke technology, whatever that may be, software, apps, data platforms. We now specialise in writing AI strategies for enterprise organisations, both in the public sector and the private sector. Really interested in this topic. We've done some recent work on the EU AI Act and GRC, so I'm happy to share that with everyone. But yeah, it's going to be a good session.
Great. Rob?
Hi, morning everybody. So I'm Rob Mannion. I'm the CEO of B2B Store. We've been operating in the wholesale space, principally food and beverage, for around 15 years. Support some of the biggest wholesalers and brands. And AI is impacting us hugely as a company and our customer base. So I can talk about how it's impacting us from a productivity standpoint, how it's changing the way we're coding, and how it's revolutionized our product capabilities.
Right, and finally, Matt.
Yeah, hi, I'm Matthew. I'm head of product at High Comply. So I've got just over a decade of product leadership experience in SaaS, and it's my mandate to make sure that High Comply is building a product that provides a robust ISMS and that gets people certified.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So I suppose starting out, as today is when the EU AI Act comes into force, it makes sense to kind of get an idea of what that looks like and what that means for businesses. So Katie, I don't know from a legal perspective whether you can tackle this one for us, please.
Of course. So the EU AI Act is the first comprehensive law that specifically targets the use of AI, and it adopts a risk-centered approach. So it categorizes AI systems into different risk levels. These include minimal risk, limited risk, high, and prohibited risks. And depending on what risk level your AI solution falls within, it will then trigger kind of different requirements under the EU AI Act, with the bulk of the requirements and obligations applying to higher risk uses of AI. Now, it's often asked kind of, we're in the UK, is it relevant to us? Kind of what extraterritorial impact will the Act have, or does it have? And actually, it has a really wide-ranging impact. So any organisations that are operating in the EU very likely to kind of fall within the scope if you're using AI in some shape or form. And this will include AI systems that are marketed in the EU, AI systems that are just used more generally, and AI systems where the actual output's then used or deployed somehow in the EU. So every organisation really that is using or dealing with AI in some way and has some sort of operation or presence in the EU will need to consider the EU AI Act requirements and how they apply. Now, it's been coming into force gradually, the EU AI Act. So there were provisions concerning prohibited AI practices. They came into force in February this year. So things like exploiting vulnerabilities or intentionally manipulating behaviour of individuals, that those are banned in the EU and under the Act. But we've also had, and you know, just to pause there, it kind of makes sense that those are banned. Those are things that I think to most normal people, we think you just shouldn't have to ban them, but obviously the AI Act is really explicit there. And as a priority, those came in as some of the kind of first provisions to be enforced. But we've also had provisions, kind of building blocks around AI literacy requirements. And these are really helpful. They're foundation building blocks to any kind of business's AI Act compliance. And they really focus around understanding how AI systems are working, being aware of AI systems limitations, AI systems biases, and its potential to make things up, and knowing, with all against that backdrop, kind of knowing when you need a human in the loop and what human oversight's appropriate. So we've had those provisions too, and those are useful no matter what your use case is for AI, and they're really important. You know, it's something we work through with our clients kind of time and time again, helping them to understand how AI can make truly informed decisions, and how you can rely on your AI solutions. And it's already impacting businesses. You know, this is something that's been impacting businesses now for kind of several months, from updating existing policy documents, looking at internal governance processes, and thinking about how your suppliers are using AI as well. So putting kind of supplier assurance processes, really making them more robust from an op resilience point of view. And I think we've mentioned that there's rules coming into force pretty imminently as well under the AI Act, and we've got the general purpose AI models. Those requirements actually come into force, I think it's tomorrow now. So it's really, you know, this is all happening now, so it's very go. The bulk of the AI Act requirements relating to the higher risk AI systems layer, they actually come into force next year. So we've got a bit of time there, and there's some contention in the EU around whether they need to pivot and change the approach there. So it's still a watch this space, but the higher risk layer is one of the reasons that I quite often refer to the AI Act as GDPR plus, if you like, because it really, that layer of rules really builds on the existing requirements under the GDPR. So it builds on things like transparency and human oversight and accuracy. So a good starting point kind of for businesses looking to get ready for those requirements now, and the requirements that are already in force, it is building on what existing privacy compliance regimes and existing kind of regimes that you already have in place internally, adopting kind of an AI by design approach, you know, really mirroring and borrowing the things we like from the GDPR to good compliance and things that have worked well. So possibly enhancing your existing risk assessments that you have in place for those things. You know, that's a good starting point to be getting ready. We don't have an EU AI Act in the UK yet. You know, we don't have our own version. So it's still a watch this space there. And it would be really interesting to see kind of what our pro-innovation UK government does. But obviously, if you are operating in the EU, you're likely to be caught by the EU AI Act. I think my best guess, in case anyone's kind of interested, is that the UK won't necessarily mirror the AI Act, but will possibly look to more focus on kind of targeted legislation that really actually focuses around the impact of the technology that's being used, because there's been quite a lot of criticism that the EU AI Act just isn't flexible enough. You know, it's not practical for smaller businesses. It doesn't help growth, and it is quite stringent in those areas, possibly unnecessarily so in some cases too. So I think the UK might look to pivot and take a slightly different approach there. Hopefully that's a good overview.
Perfect, thank you. I mean, you mentioned there some of the ideas that businesses can apply, but I suppose, Lucy, sometimes when you look at new legislation when it comes in, it can seem so vast. So how does a business go about actually managing AI adoption alongside the sort of like the risk and also actually making sure that they are on the right side of the law?
Yeah, good question. Katie, thank you for that. That was a brilliant summary and overview. Katie kind of touched upon it. It's a bit of a minefield at the moment. So there's been a lot of backlash about the EU AI Act being too stringent, as she mentioned. What's interesting is that a lot of the foundation models, the base of the AI, the generative AI, so OpenAI, Google's Gemini, etc., Copilot. Copilot's not the model. The models that underpin those that are owned by big tech. It's really interesting to see what happens. So the EU have asked them to sign a voluntary code of practice. Meta's thrown their toys out the pram and has absolutely blatantly refused to sign it. So bear in mind, they've got a model called Llama. So that's going to be an issue for any companies that are using and tapping into that. Google have signed it, but they're still apprehensive about it, and they're not convinced by all of it. So, which is a bit of a weird approach. And then I think it's interesting who signed it and who hasn't signed it. OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, have signed it, which is great, and it looks like Microsoft are going to sign it. So. In short, it's all in a bit of flux at the moment. So America's taken a very much an innovation-first approach. Donald Trump's actually pro deepfakes, which is a bit of a concern. The other end of the spectrum is the EU AI Act, which is quite stringent, and rightly so, because it could be potentially very dangerous. And we've kind of got this pendulum going at the moment, and hopefully it will swing back at some point, and we'll get to the right place. But yes, there's been a lot of backlash about how much red tape there is with it. But to answer your question, we are working with a lot of companies. One of the first step is you've got to have an AI policy, and I'm quite gobsmacked how many companies haven't actually got one. Public sector organisations are a bit more clued up on this because they're bound by governance, so they're a bit more proactive about it. All companies need to have an AI policy. Because whether the bosses know or not, people are using ChatGPT or Copilot or generative AI potentially without their knowledge, and there's the risk that they're going to put confidential information or financial or private information into that. We've already seen examples of that. So first step is make sure you've got a robust AI policy. We've just done a massive project where we've written a load of guidelines for that. You'll need a lawyer to actually write the policy, which is where companies like Womble come in. And then no point having a policy unless you're not going to educate everybody about it. So that's where the AI literacy bit comes in, and the EU are asking that that's got to be right across the whole company. So there's some basic steps that you can do, but they would be my first two approaches. And then if you need, we've designed an ethics framework, which is basically a methodology for how you approach AI in a trustworthy, transparent way, which is aligned with the EU AI Act. But going back to my original point that we're still in a bit of flux and we don't know what the UK regulations are going to be, and they're not coming anytime soon. We're encouraging customers to follow best practice and make sure that the policies are up to place and that they're following the guidelines from the EU AI Act. And I agree with Katie, it is like GDPR, and I think it's new. I think people are a bit unaware of it. If I'm honest, I don't think people are appreciating the impact it's going to have. In terms of there will be some, I keep saying that there will be some sort of Grenfell Tower disaster, not necessarily a cybersecurity attack, and then they'll really, really clamp down on the foundation models, and they'll have to regulate it like nuclear or pharmaceutical industry. They'll have to. It's too dangerous, to be quite frank. Now, it's particularly now we're getting into things like AI agents, which I'll pick back up about. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess the next up then with Rob, I mean, I guess your B2B store works with a lot of not just wholesalers, but suppliers too. So quite right across that food supply chain, which is obviously an area that has had cyber attacks, quite high profile cyber attacks recently. So I guess that sector is really aware of the threats, and AI kind of adds to that. So I don't know what are you seeing and hearing with talking to people on the ground?
I'm not convinced it is aware of the new threat of AI. I think some of those data compromises that have happened recently I think is pre-AI world. I think I totally agree with Lucy. The need for AI policies in business right now, I'd say, is urgent. I would not be surprised if millions of businesses in the UK have not already been compromised inadvertently with staff using models, whether privately or even through the business, and the business doesn't quite understand the difference of the models, the difference of the different plans that you can get with the models. Just ticking that box to ensure that private data is not actually used to train the model. That's a very, very simple precaution that businesses could implement straight away. So I think we're right at the start of the curve. It is similar to GDPR, but I think the risk of compromising falling foul of GDPR, I think, is much greater now, given that we've got a whole new wild west that is AI. On the one hand, which presents amazing opportunity, but it definitely, we need enhanced governance in place within businesses to ensure that they're not compromised.
I mean, are wholesalers talking about it? Are they completely unaware at the moment?
I've not heard wholesalers talk about it from a data, well, from them being compromised from a business perspective. They're talking about AI. I think it's still very much toe in the water with the majority of the wholesale sector. It's a sector that's renowned for not really being ahead of the curve from a technological standpoint, if anything, behind. So I think this notion of enhanced governance of legislation, I think, is inevitable, and self-education from the sector. And it's not just wholesale. This affects all sectors.
Excellent. And Matt, obviously, one of what High Comply does is actually helping businesses get themselves ready. So obviously the new ISO 42001 is a big part of that, and that's what you are increasingly working with companies on, and I imagine that's going to become increasingly more important. So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that for me, please.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that we're working with organizations on, and I think there is a growing understanding, although it's still very nascent. It is a new technology. I think there's effectively what you're getting with having a framework like ISO 42001 is you've got it's helping you to manage the use of AI, and it maps the EU AI Act. So it's designed to mitigate those risks as well, right? Your responsibilities are defined in the framework of managing AI within the framework of the framework as well. So the controls that you need to assess and to apply and to have a robust security posture in relation to AI, whether you're building it, whether you're buying it, whether you're embedding it in your software, these are things that it's helping you to control. And so as an organization, what it should be providing you with is some regulatory readiness, right? Should be keeping you competitive, but in a safe way. I think Rob said it's like the Wild West out there. I think that's a great analogy, because the Wild West is an exciting place to be, right? But it's also dangerous. And so it's a question of how you maximize the potential that's associated with AI while minimizing those risks. And that's what having a framework in place helps you to do. So there's an element of risk reduction as well. And also you get internal accountability, because there's defined roles and responsibilities within the framework. And as a result, you should expect your AI, improved AI outcomes, right? You should expect that you've got this framework that allows you to harness the capabilities of AI, but in a way that's safe for your organization. And there's quite a lot of overlap between ISO 42001 and 27001 and other sort of standards, but specifically ISO 27001, particularly in terms of the structure, right? So there's a requirement for risk assessments, there's a requirement for audits. You've got to disseminate and prove acceptance of required reading, which is something Lucy mentioned earlier. Like, there's no point having these policies in place if nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing. But those things are all specific to the context of AI, right? So you've got this similar structure. You've defined roles and responsibilities. You've got policy and control framework. There's a need for internal audits and performance monitoring, and there's a continuous improvement process that is part of that framework as well. And then sitting over the top of that, you've got top management commitment and governance, which is also part of 27001. So it's a very similar framework, and I think that the main difference is the focus of it. Of course, it does also generate a lot of work. So if you're getting it as part of an ISMS, if you're getting 42001 as part of an ISMS, I think you should expect really that you're going to get some new document templates, additional information assets, map risks. You're going to understand the applicability of new controls, and you're going to get some control tracking and monitoring, because you've got to keep your policies and procedures up to date. Things go out of date, and you don't want your security posture to become stagnant over time. And you should expect also a little bit of cross-pollination, right? If you're already doing this for something else, if you're already doing this for ISO 27001, you should expect your ISMS to cross-pollinate. So if you're collecting evidence that shows that you're compliant with certain controls within 27001, and they also apply to something like 42001, you expect the system to understand that and present that to you, so you're not doing the same amount of work twice, so you're not having to look things up twice. Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you very much for that. And I suppose, I mean, Lisa, you touched on the fact that there are a lot of moving goalposts, I suppose. I mean, it seems that it's going to be very political, because depending on who's in power, and also I guess when it's going to come up to election time, that's going to become an issue. But you also mentioned like agents, and obviously the AI development is moving so quickly that it's not a case of saying, right, we need to be ready as of today. I suppose it's a constant adaptation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's going to evolve. And it's classic problem that the technology is moving faster than the regulations, and the speed of artificial intelligence is just phenomenal, and it's going to get faster and faster and faster. So the AI autonomous agents, which are already out there, there's actually one embedded into ChatGPT now. We've already seen some very high risk incidents with the agents are bypassing password protection, etc., etc., etc. So this is where it starts to become really, really important to get ahead of the game, basically. And as I alluded to before, yeah, it is a bit of a minefield, and you don't know where to start. So I always say that governance and cybersecurity, it's kind of nobody's interested into it until everything goes horribly wrong, and then they kind of wake up and smell the coffee about it. And there's we've just heard it can be quite laborious to put it in place, but I always like to reframe it as protection. Good governance is basically basic, what Katie said before. A lot of it's basic common sense about bias, etc., about accessibility, about accountability, traceability, transparency, etc. So a lot of it is kind of common sense, and I like that somebody said recently that cybersecurity used to be called information assurance, which I thought was a much better term of it. It's about protecting you, protecting your staff, and protecting your customers before these kind of big disasters happen. But yeah, the speed of it is phenomenal. It's only going to get faster. It's interesting that the EU, and I don't know if Katie can comment on this, it's interesting that the EU is focusing on the actual foundation models. I know that some of it's about white labeling tools and things, but I think it's going to be difficult to navigate all of it, and which is why it becomes complicated, and for customers just kind of don't know where to start, which is why it's important to do things like these webinars, just to get people aware of it more than anything else.
Okay, and Rob, I suppose wholesalers, one of the big problems that they face is that they're juggling, it's thin margins, but they've got lots of data, and there's lots of products in and products out all the time. So how on earth do they manage that themselves when they are so time poor already? Or is this the importance of having a partner like B2B Store providing technology who's doing this for them?
Well, yeah, it's having a partner. I think businesses are either going to have to, all businesses are going to have to embrace AI, full stop. But if
I agree with that.
You're almost certainly going to have to either partner with an AI provider, or you're going to have to build an AI capability in-house, which, given the speed of everything, the way things are moving right now, is going to be a challenge as well. So I think, yeah, and then also do your due diligence on your service providers if you are going to do that, or if you're going to do it in-house, that governance. We've been through this journey. We achieved ISO 27001 using High Comply last year. We're in the process of doing ISO 42001, and it makes you ask some really simple but really important questions about how are you using AI, and that in itself gave me some clarity in terms of how to deploy it and bring your employees in on the journey as well, because you could easily have an employee here, whether a wholesaler or a service provider or in any sector, who could inadvertently compromise the business's data. So yeah, I think you have to do due diligence both internally and on your supply chain when it comes to deploying and leveraging AI right now.
Okay. And Katie, I mean, I suppose the worst case scenario for a wholesaler is that they suddenly find themselves exposed to something like this, but regardless of what sort of attack that might be. So what should, if there was one building block that they need to do on a Monday morning, what would that be? I mean, how do you control this situation that could suddenly be getting away from you?
Yeah, so one of the things we are seeing lots and lots of is kind of management and CEOs and CTOs kind of saying we must roll out AI. This is really important. We want to be pro innovation. We want to be innovative. We want to get ahead of it, and just buying in these tools kind of without any necessarily full risk assessment or actually kind of bringing the employees along the journey. So I think a lot of our clients are kind of coming to us and saying we've got this new tool to demo and to pilot, but we have no idea kind of what we're meant to be using it for, what data we're meant to be putting into it. So one of the things that we've started actually doing, because we as a firm have kind of rolled out a number of tools that we use, you know, we've obviously gone through supplier assurance and checked them. But so what we've been doing is kind of having information sharing with some of those key clients to actually kind of work out how we've used tools, what prompts work for us, what guardrails we've put in place. Things like we've already talked about ticking the box that your data can't be trained on and things like that, but making sure that you've got your own instance of a tool in your environment so it's controlled, so that your data can't go anywhere, and you're really clear around who owns it. I think that's all important. So I think a building block for me would be, it's great that you want to be innovative and buy something, but possibly pause before just rolling it out, and not for the sake of it, not because you want to write down War and Peace and be really difficult with your employees and kind of almost strangle their innovation, not because of that, but because they will welcome some sort of guidelines and parameters. And you know, pilot groups are great because you can obviously have kind of a focus group of like 5, 10, tens, hundreds, however many you want in that focus group, to come up with your use cases and then really understand, actually, this is what our employees think they're going to make the most benefit from, and this is actually how we now need to protect it. You know, we see the key risk being around this type of data or this type of use case, and then you can, you know, update all those things we've talked about, like your AI policies and your guidance and your internal kind of governance structure, so that if something does go wrong, if we know who to escalate to, and that's really important.
Excellent. And Matt, I suppose then from a compliance perspective, I mean, we're hearing all the threats that there are, and you said yourself, I mean, it takes a lot of time in order to introduce, well, you know, seeing how much time goes into getting ISO 27001. Even if you apply the same theory to getting ISO 42001, it's another load of work, right? So if are small businesses in particular, or businesses like wholesalers who've got tight margins and smaller teams, what are there certain clauses? Are there certain areas that should be the real foundation of what they're focusing on initially to get the biggest bang for their buck?
Yeah, well, I think Lucy mentioned it already, and it's having the policies in place, right? It's putting the guardrails in place as to what sort of technologies you should and shouldn't be using, what you should and shouldn't be putting in them, what settings you should and shouldn't have on. There needs to be like I think actually Lucy mentioned also that it's it's not just a top-down adoption, it's a bottom-up adoption as well, right? So you've got lots of individuals using AI and using AI tools. The tech is opaque, right? Even the people who built the technology don't fully understand. I was reading an article the other day about they're trying to reduce the number of hallucinations that are taking place within AI models. But part of the problem with that is that effectively the developers built an algorithm and then fed it the world's literature. And then the algorithm then predicts what it should be writing next based on filling the space. But they don't know exactly how it fills that space, right? So even the people who developed it don't fully understand the technology. So the tech is a bit opaque. And then you've got all these So you've got several providers for technology as well. You've got OpenAI, Anthropic, Perplexity AI, DeepSeek, and that's just a handful of them. Right? There's more than that, and then you've got all these agents on top of that all these tools on top of that are kind of powered by AI. So it's almost like a perfect storm, because also you think about the type of information you're giving AI. You're giving it just forget about what people are putting in chats. Note-taking software is in on all your meetings, right? If you've got sales enablement software, it's listening to all your calls, right? You're also potentially making decisions off the back of that data, and it's fairly easy to become reliant on decision-making technology to make decisions for us. And we've all read stories about people who drove their car into a lake because they were listening to the sat nav, except you have the potential to drive your business into a lake, right? So I think you've got this kind of perfect storm where the technology is opaque. There's all these models. You've got these additional layers of organizations that have got adding data processing and handling to that, and then you've got the AI Act on the top of that, and it's potentially generating some liabilities for you. I think you've got all that. You've got the technology that's being adopted. It's being adopted very, very quickly, and it's not the first time we've seen this, incidentally, right? So if you think about things like IoT or bring your own device or cloud adoption, right? Those technologies were adopted very, very quickly, and then a risk is identified, and the market reacts and it builds tools. So think about things like mobile data management, mobile application management, SSO, multi-factor authentication, right? These tools are designed to help mitigate against the risks that are created by this tech, and the market will catch up as well when it comes to AI. But in the intervening period, right, you're in this very vulnerable space. If you haven't at a minimum written down how your employees need to interact with AI, and then given them that and make sure they're reading it, right, you're in an incredibly vulnerable space, because there's a perfect storm there, right? You've got opaque tech giving it you're potentially giving lots of information, different suppliers, different levels of robustness within those suppliers. You're potentially making decisions off the back of that information, and the industry standard tools aren't quite there yet either. You're in a really vulnerable space. So yeah, getting those policies in place. I mean, Lucy mentioned it already, but it's critical.
Yeah. And I mean, to throw a little bit of a curveball your way, Katie. Good luck. So as we're talking about businesses and how that's having an effect on them, but there are individuals in businesses. I mean, Matt mentions there that you've got people you've got your AI note-taking software that's always listening to you, right? So there are things now that are documented, things that might have been informal conversations, things that were there. So there are now greater risks for the employee as well as the business itself. So is that, and I think there was actually a story this week. There was somebody, OpenAI were talking about this, that they said people are socially, they're feeding lots of information into it, but obviously it's not covered legally that they could then be sharing that information. So is there an issue for individuals to be aware of from a legal perspective as well as a business?
Yeah, I mean, the most common thing that we all experience day to day is that we are monitored kind of generally by our employees or other areas that we go into. So if we walk into a shop, for example, we're captured on CCTV, and there's likely monitoring around kind of where best in the store to advertise to us, where best billboards should be, whether personalized ads should kind of pop up as we follow around the store, for example, and in our day-to-day jobs, monitoring how productive we've been in a particular day, that, and some organizations literally take that, to a very extreme. I won't name them, but some of the bigger tech giants, are known for kind of in their warehouses, tracking people around the warehouse and thinking kind of how productive have they been? Why can someone else kind of deliver this faster? and how come different people have different outputs of productivity in one day. Obviously, you kind of see that actually those things, some of them might seem more straightforward than others, but particularly where you're monitoring people and going to be making a key decision about them. So possibly if us as employees are going to be subject to kind of promotions or possible disciplinary action, it's that kind of thing that actually both from an employer and an employee, that there's a real risk there. And I think that's where actually the rules that we already have around kind of processing personal data are really there and designed to protect us as individuals and make sure that our personal data is handled in accordance with other laws, so in accordance with kind of equality laws and employment laws, as well as data protection law, but also that decisions are made about us in a fair way in accordance with the GDPR. So I think it's really being alive to those rights. And I guess if you're not sure not sure about them, possibly you don't visit those relevant stores if you're not getting the transparency, or you're getting kind of weird marketing, or you're asked to use a tool. We're seeing more and more tools be built in retail stores, for example, that kind of allow you to try things on virtually. It's obviously there for you to make that choice to do it. And I would be saying to people to kind of very much in the same way as employers and retailers should be doing the same, is stop and pause and think, what's happening here? Am I clear? Do I want to kind of go through that process? Is that a good idea for me? And I think, in the workplace situation, employers, we've seen really good practices around employers providing kind of enhanced transparency around their monitoring. We've got lots of guidance kind of from the UK data protection regulator, the ICO, on workplace monitoring. For example, it's issued a kind of separate guidance note on that and on just AI and data protection. So that kind of thing is very useful, I think, if you're a kind of in the workplace and you're thinking about rolling out tools that are gonna impact your employees. That's definitely a first port of call that I'd say you should be looking at.
Excellent, thank you. Obviously, we're talking about the small businesses a lot, and wholesalers in particular, but the whole food supply chain is vulnerable in different ways. So there have been quite high-profile attacks recently, which have been enabled by AI, and they will be enhanced. I'm sure that's going to be more prevalent as things grow. So, I mean, I don't know, Lucy, if you were able to talk to us a little bit about that and where we think that the state of play is going to change, because I imagine, again, if technology is changing so quickly, it's not just for good that this is going to be used, that it's going to increase exponentially, presumably.
Yeah, it's classic, isn't it? It's cat and mouse. So the AI, it's speed, it's doing things beyond human capability. So but a bad acting AI can analyze like billions of data points, we've seen, I'm sure the guys will echo this, we've seen that the targets tend to be the IT suppliers. So that's where they're going in, is they're going through the supply chain. I thought it was just a personal note on the Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op recent attacks, which have cost them billions of pounds. Co-op kind of nipped it in the bud by pulling the plugs out, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. But it goes back to what I was saying, that people don't think about, I'm going to have a cyber attack until it happens, and then the chaos that we've got a local Co-op store, and it just caused absolute chaos in terms of their product. They just didn't have any product basically for about 3 or 4 weeks, so the impact's just phenomenal. But to answer your question, yes, there'll be much more tools. I mean, there's something like 25,000 AI tools and plugins come out. There's over 1 million bits of AI code on GitHub, which is a developers platform. I mean, the speed of it's just phenomenal. But we'll see, like Rob was talking about before, we'll see other things coming in to counteract that. So it's this continuous cat and mouse. I mean, one of the examples I always use that when people talk about losing jobs and roles is that cybersecurity didn't exist 20 years ago, and now it's a multi-billion-dollar organization. I think we'll start seeing new types of different types of AI security or AI governance organizations, fact checking, for example. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that.
Excellent. Okay. And I suppose, you know, the potential danger, and I suppose with M&S and Co-op, they've got, because they're so large, they've got a little bit more kind of backing behind them. But Rob, wholesalers, they perhaps can't afford any downtime in the sense that, as we've spoken about the margins a few times. So is there a sort of ignorance, with want of a better phrase, for want of a better word, is there an ignorance for wholesalers to realize how vulnerable they are if they come in the crosshairs of some of these people wanting to like kind of have a cyber attack?
I don't know if there's an ignorance. I mean, generally speaking, these hackers, wherever they're coming from, attacking this high-profile business like Marks and Spencer's, etc. But one of the things that instigated this discussion actually was I saw an article in one of the trade magazines. It was about a small wholesaler. I think it was a food service wholesaler who'd been attacked. You know, I'd never heard of them. A regional business, I think, in the south of England, and that was the first time I'm starting to see it's gone mainstream. So that should raise alarm bells. Given the lack of technological adoption, I think the wholesale channel in particular is arguably more vulnerable than some of the more high-profile businesses, but even who are already falling foul of it, despite probably having extremely mature governance and systems in place. So, yeah, I think education as well. I think, again, things like this webinar hopefully are going to be useful for open people's eyes. Just as business owners, they need to take responsibility, recognise that AI.
I would sorry to butt in. I would add everyone needs to take responsibility for how they're using AI. Everyone.
Yeah, top-down management, and take your team on the journey, because everybody's role is also going to be changed, you know, to greater or lesser extent. So staff are going to have to see that the management are taking it seriously, putting the relevant governance in place. And we're just saying about how it's going to affect employees, but I think also customers engaging with, certainly wholesalers, are increasingly going to be doing that via AI systems. You know, we are actually launching some AI conversational systems in just a few weeks. So we have to make sure that all the governance, the guardrails, the security, our customers are going to have to ensure that they are comfortable, that they've also done the assessment, the risk assessment as well. So it's a brave new world we're moving in, and it's coming at us real fast.
Can I just add something? Can I just add something to that? That historically, customers follow brands that they trust. So that goes back to the kind of first principles of, if you get ahead of the game and you start introducing best practice, you're going to become a trustworthy brand when all the wheels fall off. So I firmly believe that the customers will decide in whichever sector it is. So if you're demonstrating that the AI that you're using isn't biased, is trustworthy, etc., I think those companies are going to actually get ahead of the game.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that this urgency discussion, it comes up, right, and it tends to come up when there's been either a new threat's been identified, or there's been a big attack. And I think when it does come up, the discussion I try to have with people is one about institutional resilience, right? I mean, the best time to put a robust cybersecurity governance framework in place is years ago, right? And the second best time is now. And I think, so I think you need to sort of develop some institutional resilience to the threats that are coming up, because the landscape is changing all the time. New threats are coming up. We know 70 to 80% of cyber attacks are actually related to social engineering, right? And AI has the capability to make social engineering more sophisticated at scale. So that's going to become a danger. And I think what you need your ISMS to do is to be a framework so that you can identify, you can assess, you can mitigate new threats as they bubble up, whether they come from AI or whether they don't. So at a minimum, you should be demanding from your software the ability to register information assets, map those assets to risks, give you a framework to complete risk assessments in a consistent way, allow you to understand the impact and the cost of those mitigations. Understand what frameworks could be applicable, and understand which controls should be applicable for your business. And there's other things it should be doing as well, disseminating documentation and allowing you to see who's ready. It's also important, but you want a certain amount of institutional resilience. You want that structured flexibility, right? Where you're in a position where you are already doing risk assessments, you're already auditing, you already understand what controls are applicable. So that you can put additional controls in place if you need to help protect you from the changing landscape. It is funny though, the urgency question comes up, and it tends to come up when something goes wrong. I think Lucy mentioned it a couple of times.
It's reactive rather than proactive.
Well, nobody thinks about it until it happens. Right?
Exactly. Good governance is protection, and cyber security is assurance. That's the way you should look at it.
I think the thing is, business people generally have a sort of a healthy relationship with risk, but it does mean that stuff like this gets pushed a little bit towards the back of the agenda.
Yeah, I agree.
Sort of left until it happens, and then
I totally agree.
Everybody is all anybody wants to talk about then when something goes wrong.
Well, then, I mean, presumably the thing here is, especially with the speed in which AI can work. So I guess, Lucy, this is, something you seem to be quite passionate about, that we are going to see businesses that are not just vulnerable, but if they don't have that backing, there are going to be businesses who go out of business.
They will.
And what sort of level of threat do you think there is for this?
For me, I think the big thing is about personal data. That's going to be the biggie. So we're already seeing examples of a couple of months ago, there was the first ever case where the High Court in the UK have allowed a woman to, she's now going to try to sue Meta. I mean, good luck with that one, because that would be like David and Goliath. But that was around, she was pregnant and she was getting bombarded with maternity and baby adverts on Facebook. And she complained because she said that she hadn't given them any of her data and she clicked all the security buttons. So that's a kind of, I don't know what the word is, not textbook. It's that's going to open the doors for a lot more cases like this. I think it's going to be around personal data and privacy. I think that's where it's going to hit, and everyone's paranoid about it now as well. I'm just in general, I'm hearing people talking about Alexa's listening to me, and Alexa's trying to sell me another black t-shirt because I've just bought a black t-shirt and I don't want another black t-shirt. So I think it's going to be particularly in retail. It's that data privacy bit. Every customer I meet the first thing they want is a chatbot. And we know that chatbots can have bias in it because of the data they're trained on. You need to be really, really, really careful with them. Also, it's about getting it right. So understanding your customers. So a good example of that is not quite retail, but Octopus Energy deployed AI within 16 weeks. It didn't cost them a massive amount of money, but they totally got the tone of voice right on their customer chatbot. Made it very personalized. It was very much in the aligned with their brand, and it's been hugely successful. But I think people are somebody mentioned this before, everybody wants AI because it's the sexy new toy in the toolbox. Everyone wants to be saying that everyone wants to say that they're an AI company, and they're rushing into it with blinkers on. And I think I'm convinced there's going to be some disasters, some fallout from it. So it's about being prepared, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there's a big legal side to that as well. So, I mean, Lucy mentioned there, Katie, that there's a whole personal data storm coming and people are more aware of it. But, actually social media and our phones have been listening to us for years. I mean, you're just going to go on your feeds and something you've spoken about turns up there. So is it just that it's more of a sharper focus now, Katie, or is there something more now that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think it has been building since GDPR. Obviously, we had a big kind of privacy awareness, but I think Lucy's definitely right. People are now kind of hyper aware, and we're really looking out for things like we might say to someone we like something and then see an advert for it, kind of on our phone or on our social media, and we think that's really unusual. The challenges here around kind of having is the legal framework kind of robust enough to allow people to actually kind of challenge it. And Lucy's alluded to the fact that obviously with the big giant companies like Meta, the big giant tech companies, it's actually very tricky there to kind of get that understanding and that transparency. Actually, is it Meta or is it another party that's got your data and advertising to you on the platform? So where we see kind of our clients succeed, our retail clients in particular, is really actually getting kind of things like tone of voice, for example. We've already mentioned that's very important, but things like your website, making sure that it's not just your privacy policy that's up to date. It's not just set out in the bulk weeds of your privacy policy around what you're doing. If you're about to monitor someone or about to do something different, kind of in a slightly higher risk or more intrusive, why not tell them? We call it just-in-time notices, but it's quite straightforward. It should be very clear that you're interacting with an AI. It shouldn't be confusing. Is it an individual? Is it an AI? When does it switch between them? It's that kind of thing. So in the chatbots, building that in, that's really important. So kind of if you start off the chat that it's a generic chatbot and then it gets escalated to someone who comes in and then they might duck out again and then you might have the AI back. But it's that kind of thing that really helps. And it sounds simple, but if you don't have that foundation right, then the chances are you're not kind of using people's more sensitive and special category data correctly either in an AI context. So getting the foundations right, setting everything up kind of helps build that trust that users and individuals do kind of follow you on that kind of evolution of kind of, okay, well, we're rolling out this basic AI. I know exactly how that works, and I'm therefore going to trust you more when you roll out kind of a more fraud prevention tool. I'm going to want to use that because I'm going to trust that you've done it in the right way. And while it has access to quite a lot of my data, I like your brand, and I'm really clear. You've given me good transparency throughout. It's that kind of thing that we're seeing clients really succeed. But it's the little things, and they're not the most exciting. It's not the most exciting for a board kind of to put a publication out there saying we've improved our governance and our transparency notices by this much percent and invested this much in it. It's just not as exciting as shouting and screaming about a really cool innovative tool that you've developed or bought. So there's that piece too, that it's not always kind of a big win and a big impact, but I think it's all these little things that will kind of have, if you don't do them right, it's almost like they start to create cracks and gaps and issues that eventually, when something bigger happens, everything will kind of come tumbling down if you don't have those foundations right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, Rob, you're working with a lot of different businesses, and you've worked with wholesalers in lots of different sectors as well over the decades, right? So do you think that you want to see, when there's all of this sort of big threat, I mean, sometimes it's a little bit quiet, you don't know what to say, but do you want to see more from some of the federations and associations, or should they be doing more? Is there something they can be doing and partnering with a provider as well, so they're as aware as possible to let their members know what's happening?
Yeah, you sort of gave my age away a little bit there, Chris, inadvertently. So yeah, no, 100%. I think the federations, various trade associations in whatever sector should be taking this really seriously, and arguably have a responsibility to help their members along. There's definitely going to be threats for businesses in all sectors, but equally there's going to be enormous opportunities. I think education is absolutely key. So yeah, 100%. I think the trade association should be looking at this, becoming educated themselves, talking to experts in this field, and taking a leadership role here. And it's about survival, it's about succeeding, but this could potentially go the other way as well for lots of businesses if they're not doing it properly. And the trade association has that central view. They have the interests of the entire sector at its heart. So yeah, I think any trade association representing any form of membership right now should be looking at this and trying to understand what the implications are for their respective sector, and help educate their members as to what not only the threats are and how to mitigate them, but also what the opportunities are as well.
And I mean, you've worked with some big national wholesalers as well and buying groups out there. So I mean, if a really bad security threat came about, can you see it being catastrophic for them? I mean, with your kind of ingrained knowledge of how they work.
Well, clearly from a PR perspective, depending on what the threat is, if you're a national tens of thousands of customers. This will be plastered all over the grocer and the other trade magazines, and arguably more mainstream press as well. So yeah, I mean, obviously it depends what the threat is, whether it's a small breach, whether it's an individual has inadvertently put some confidential content into a system that's now training a system, or whether it's a major breach of hundreds of thousands or millions of customer records. It depends really how catastrophic it is. But either way, companies have a responsibility to put the relevant governance in place now. I don't think that this AI is new, but this issue of governance around data and is not new. We should know what to do, and I think everybody needs to get a move on, frankly.
Excellent. And so in terms of like last few minutes then now, so I want to get some key takeaways and some practical advice, I suppose. So going to you, Matt, I suppose, I guess you're the starting point on this, really, that compliance is important, and that probably is the key thing that people need to take away from this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think we've mentioned it a couple of times, but institutional resilience, really having a framework in place so that you can manage and identify these things as they come up is actually more important than reacting. Having a set of robust frameworks in place, not only does it reduce the risk of incidents happening, but it also means that if an incident did take place, we've seen how it applies to the legislation. I'm sure Katie will be able to advise much better on this than me, but it effectively, if you can show that you've got those frameworks in place and then something does go wrong, what you're effectively able to do is show that it's not a systemic issue, and that you do have controls in place, but something slipped through the net, which should reduce then any liability that's attracted by an incident happening. So I think the key takeaway is to have some of that institutional resilience in place, to have the frameworks and the infrastructure in place to be able to identify and manage risks as they come up.
Excellent. And Katie, then similarly, if you had one, elevator pitch and say you need to do this now, what would it be that you'd tell businesses?
If you're buying in AI tools, I'd say get curious. So ask lots of questions of the supplier. Ask about how they've trained the data, kind of what the blind spots are. They should be able to tell you these things. And if they haven't, you really need to consider kind of whether you have that understanding of the weaknesses that you need to be able to build them into your use cases.
Excellent. And Lucy, any final thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, I'm really happy that a couple of people have said bring your workforce with you. That's a key one for me. So get your AI policy in place, but make sure that everybody knows about it. Just really simple education and awareness, just telling people the risks and what they can and can't do. And that also AI shouldn't be the default tool. And I totally agree about the frameworks, governance frameworks, which should be around your ethics and trust, should be based around your ethics and trust policy. And the only thing I'll add to what Rob said is that, Matt said, is that they should be flexible, because the regulations are going to change. We don't know what the UK ones are going to be yet. So make sure you've got some sort of framework, methodology approach, but that's agile and flexible over a period of time.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone, kind of being on the panel. And sharing their thoughts. I think it's a very interesting discussion. I think it's one that's going to continue, for the next few weeks, months, years. I would say anyone who's attending, if you've got any kind of thoughts or you want to reach out to somebody, you'll be able to find everybody on LinkedIn. But equally, send something across to the team here who've arranged it. We can always look to do something a little bit more. And probably, someone somewhere on this panel is going to be able to provide you some good advice. So. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.